Welcome to DejaVue.
It's your favorite Vue podcast. You probably know it by now, but otherwise, you should check out all the episodes. We're in a 40-somethings episode here, fresh in the new year, after hearing, some predictions and a little recap. Yeah, we are here not alone. First of all, I'm here with my lovely co-host, Michael Thiessen. Michael, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you?
Can't complain. Still same old. And Michael and I are here with the wonderful Justin Schroeder. Justin, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on, Michael, Alex.
Of course. And I mean, you are, quite well known in the Vue community. You, and of course, a lot of other people from your team maintain quite some open source projects. You're an open source creator. I think mostly people know you for this little project around a very easy topic in the web, forms, right? Formkit.
That's true.
Yeah, of course, we'll dig into why forms are not as easy as people usually believe they are, and why all applications are kind of big forms with a little bit of gimmicks in there, but also other projects around that you did, and maybe also some hot takes that is, just as well known for. But maybe let's get started with something that we usually ask people on here, Vue.js. How did you get into programming and eventually to use Vue.js, and also why?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think my programming journey is like probably so many others. I got interested in it when I was really little. So I actually grew up in Europe, in Germany and Italy. And my parents moved when I was a young kid from Germany to Italy. And I didn't know a soul in the whole country. And I was like in fourth or fifth grade. I was a young kid. And so I was sitting around like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And I started dinking around on a computer. And next thing you know, I had written, this would have been 1998. And I wrote some JavaScript, which was like basically didn't exist yet. I mean, it was like so brand new. And all it did was make an alert pop up on my screen that said whatever message I wanted to. And I was like, this is incredible. I am the master and commander of the universe. And from then on, I just started kind of programming. So I did a little bit of basic when I was a kid, and I did Java because Java was all hot back then. And all roads lead back to the web is what I've learned. It doesn't matter like which direction you wanted to go in, even if you're like a systems programmer, you end up trying to do systems programming for the web because that's where people are. So at some point, I think I was a sophomore in high school, and I came home for the summer and I was like, okay, there's this new way to make websites that doesn't involve tables anymore, where you like lay everything out with like CSS. I'm going to learn that, and I'm going to learn this language called PHP, which is also relatively new, as a way to like make websites do things. So that was my mission for the summer. I did it. And then I kind of thought after that, that was the end of programming for me. But so I went to school to become a pilot when I went to college and kind of put this fun engineering thing on the side, did that, got my flight ratings and everything, went and got a job as a pilot, flew for a few years, and then got married and realized like this is a horrible career because we were married for I think 2 weeks, and then my company sent me to somewhere for a month, and then I came back and was there for like a week, and then they were like, all right, you're going to Chile for another couple months. I was like, I think I quit.
Yeah. Wow.
So I just decided to make a quick career shift. And that would have been back 13 years ago or so. Picked back up all my old habits. And, like I think almost every Vue user, I was a Laravel person for a little while because I was in the PHP world, And then Vue was actually, really popular. But before I did Vue, I did React because React was earlier than Vue. And so I wanted to get an idea of what this React thing was. So me and at this point I was working at an agency, and me and my coworker, who I love so very much, we wanted to try this React thing, but we didn't understand it. So we decided, let's program our own version of React in jQuery because we understand jQuery. So let's build a reactive framework in jQuery. And it wasn't like we were going to open source this or anything. It was just like, can we understand it? So that way now, like, I think it's almost irresponsible to pick up a tool if you don't understand sort of like what it's doing, at least to some degree. So we did it, and we shipped one project with our crazy, insane React-y jQuery. And then we started using React until Taylor Otwell's famous tweet being like, Vue's cool. And we were like, all right, let's try that. And that, the rest is history.
What do you think, how much time was there between you starting to use React and the tweet from Taylor Otwell, just like roughly?
Oh, not long at all. I mean, I would say I probably shipped 3 like full production apps in React. So what we're talking probably less than a year, maybe like 9 months that I did React full time, and then picked up Vue after that. And I don't even remember. I want to say Vue 2 was not out yet. It was not stable or something. Everybody has this in their timeline, so other people will know more precisely than I will. But it was very early. Like I think I started with Vue 2 and was like reading the change log, not understanding, what was getting dropped from Vue 1 or something like that. So it was in those days. Definitely, yeah, I don't know, 6-7 years ago. It's a long time ago, it feels like. But,
Probably even more, yeah. But
yeah, and that was me.
Interesting. And then like you stuck with
it's
Vue.
2025. I was way before that.
Yeah. Like,
oh my goodness.
Because I started 8 years ago, and that was like Vue 2 had been out for some time already. So
you guys are right. Yeah, that would have been eons ago. But actually, and Nuxt was a godsend in that moment when I was trying to learn this new framework because it was opinionated. It's actually less opinionated now, of course, but Nuxt 2 was, Sebastian's ideas were so baked into that kind of like the structure and the layout and the fabric of it. It was like that was almost my learning tool more than the documentation. Was just, oh, here's how someone else had gone about thinking about where to put components and where to do this, and like, oh, okay, I can see how this works good. And then you have a basis to form your own opinions. So I really appreciated everything that that Nuxt did for me back in those early days too.
So, as you just mentioned, Nuxt, would you say this is more the patterns that Nuxt was promoting in terms of like, okay, here's the folder structure, here's how we do things, or also in terms of how Nuxt solves certain things source code wise, so like actually implementation details?
I don't think at that point I really had a great idea for what Nuxt was doing in its implementation, other than it solved the server-side rendering problem. So for me, like picking Nuxt at that moment was I get to use, at the time we said isomorphic JavaScript. Nowadays we think that's a gobbledygook term, but server and browser. And it solved that problem set for us, which was we need to pre-render or server render, but then just the conventions of where you put stuff and what directory structures look like and things like that. It seems so simple, but when you pick up I can't imagine nowadays trying to get into the web and just being completely lost at how many different tools are getting, pulled in and compiled. Like it's mind-boggling. And so being able to have something where it's like, hey, you've got the pattern already here. You don't need learn this thing and then you can figure out other stuff. Learn the rules before you break them.
I think that's a really valuable thing. And when I first started, I was just doing front end stuff, and there were other back end developers that dealt with like database schemas and stuff. So I just worried about the CSS. But then when I switched jobs, then I became a full stack developer, but we were using Rails. And so that was so helpful because then I could go and I could see, oh, well, okay, if I want to update the database, there's this thing here that I can, like, all of it goes into this folder. Then there's another folder where we define like the actions. Then there's another folder that we define the views. And then like there was a place to put things, and it wasn't just like, okay, I just have to like figure this out and mixing database calls into your front end because you don't know any better, right? And then it's just you have something to follow. Like that's such a huge.
It's really, really huge. And when I had first learned PHP, there were no frameworks. I wrote my own framework to make it work. And at some point I got turned on to CodeIgniter.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. And when the writing was on the wall that CodeIgniter was going away, I was on some like IRC channels or something. I ended up getting in touch with Sean McCool. Do you guys know who that guy is? I'm pretty sure that's his name. He's like an OG legend from the ancient days. And he was like, you should check out this Laravel thing. It's like brand new. It sort of works. And that was playing the same role for me in a different stage of my journey. It was like, it's great to come in with some preformed ideas around some engineers who have already done it. I mean, if somebody is listening to this and is wanting to get into this stuff, don't try to learn all the tools immediately on your own. Go with something where you can get a finished product and then learn the tools one at a time. Maybe go back one layer of abstraction each time you do a new project. Like understand a little bit more about the stack. But yeah, use a tool that's doing it for you.
I can really resonate with that, also coming from Laravel in the past, and exactly the same feeling of like, okay, you're not overwhelmed with like, okay, where should I put these things, and do I need subfolders, this, that, but you have a rather clear structure with still enough flexibility and freedom to like make it your own in a project. And then have people with like, okay, we have conventions, let's some other conventions, or hey, I don't like this because of certain reasons with like models and how they were guarded, whatnot. So I really think meta frameworks and also backend frameworks really help with that, and to not be like, okay, I have to reinvent the wheel, I have to do it all on my own. I can follow these conventions, and at some point I can start also understanding, hey, why is this actually happening? Why is that a good idea? Or maybe why this is not the case for a project. So I also think as a beginner now, it's super difficult to like get started and just have not this typical analysis paralysis where like, okay, which of the frameworks should I use? And then there may be not just one, but maybe 3 meta frameworks out there. Think of like, I don't know, 10-stack, Next, Remix, and probably even more. Or like, hey, should I just roll my own?
Yeah.
So, or are they by choosing React first of all? Which brings me to the point, why didn't you stick with React that you already learned and said like, okay, you ship 3 applications with that. What made you change to Vue after going into that?
That is a good question. So my coworker who I was working with was really gung-ho about Vue. He was not part of the 3 projects I did in React. And so when we were looking to do a new project together, it was sort of a greenfield. And from his perspective, just looking at the 2, Vue was going to be way easier to learn. And I also enjoy learning new things. So I thought, yeah, let's give it a shot. And then when we did it, we just fell in love with it. It was just so much easier for us to get our heads around. Single file components in particular, at the time, that was, very unique and incredibly powerful. And we were big CSS junkies. That was kind of like we actually enjoyed CSS. And so the co-location of actual CSS, not Tailwind at the time, but like actual CSS in the file fit our mental model really, really well. So all of those things, I think, kind of, went together to make it a tool that at that company we started to use repeatedly. And once you've gotten past the learning curve on a given tool, it almost doesn't make sense to switch again. Like, there's very, very little reason to ever want to switch once you are very, very proficient at a tool. And, one of the things I do a lot of times in one of my talks is show how that reason is getting like smaller and smaller and smaller over time. There's very small differentiations between these anymore. React is actually probably the most differentiated now because of the render cycle that it has. And so much has coalesced. So it's easier than ever to learn a new framework, and there's like less reason than ever to learn a new framework if you're really good at one. And nowadays, the biggest reason to change is the meta framework, not the framework. The meta framework is where like all of the new important stuff is happening. So it's more important to pick a meta framework you like than, which front end framework you want. At least that's my opinion.
Well, and I think a lot of people end up learning new frameworks because they switch jobs, and that's just like what they have to do. So
yeah,
they're forced to in a way.
Yep. Well, and it's funny because the cross-pollination of ideas between the frameworks, everybody switches jobs, and then they're like, well, now that I'm using Vue, I liked this one thing from React, and then they sort of end up making their way eventually into those frameworks themselves, and we end up in a very, very similar place.
Or they build some libraries so they can have that feature in the next thing, and
Interesting. So then you would say, if you, let's say you have no knowledge of a framework right now, it is like, okay, whatever is like out there, I don't know. I know jQuery, I know JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and I would have to pick a framework, or as you said, more importantly, a meta framework. Which is the horse you would bet on?
Well, I'm obviously very biased, as are you, Alex.
That's why I'm asking you.
I absolutely love Nuxt and Nuxt 3. I think they're the most complete solution that sort of exists that gives you tools as far up the stack or down the stack you want. And I do occasionally do projects in others. Like most recently, I did a project in Next. And obviously, anytime somebody does something in another framework they're less familiar with, there's going to be problem areas. But I kept being surprised at how little of the stack the Next actually covered. Next didn't cover as much as Nuxt. Part of that is the fact that we have plugins and there's this entire un.js framework that goes under the hood where you can go really really down low, or you can go really really high up into things like you don't get to quite modify the way Vue runs itself, but very close. You actually can if you want to write your own render, but not very many people do that. But you can go very very high on the stack and still be within the Nuxt sandwich. And so I personally really love that, because there's a lot of times where we've made Nuxt do crazy things that we needed it to, like run Python as the backend instead of JavaScript, or do some pretty insane things that you're just never going to be able to get Next to do. And then I also love the fact that I can deploy it absolutely anywhere. Puya has done an incredible job of getting that stuff to run on anything, and Cloudflare in particular, because Cloudflare I would say is one of the hardest things to get stuff to run on when you want to run not their boilerplate worker code. And so the fact that it works there is really, really impressive. So that's a bunch of glowing review about it. That being said, I'm romantically smitten with Solid and SolidStart. I think what Ryan Carnato's done there is take his time and observe the way that all of these other frameworks have evolved over time, and seen a lot of potholes that they found, and then try to build sort of the best bridge solution for each of the big problems. And so he has a little bit of that benefit of hindsight. I mean, it's not just him, but he's kind of driving the project. But they've gotten to kind of look back and solve all of the problems with a fresh slate with no real legacy. And so I think it's very, very cool what they've done over there. That's the, if I was just going to pick one up for fun and play, I would start there. I don't know how many jobs out there are really in that ecosystem and whatnot, but yeah.
I guess not too many, but I think also following Solid and Ryan especially also very closely, because everything related to signals, performance, streaming, as you said, analyzing what the ecosystem has to offer right now, what are good options and where is room for improvement, especially without things like necessarily a compiler to fix things, let's say, quote unquote, with the React compilers, hey, I make your code faster by inserting memorization where it might be better. In a way, it's a very interesting approach to say, okay, we don't want to rely on yet another tool in the tool chain, but straight away want to hit it right. So I'm really curious where this is going.
I don't follow a lot of other frameworks that closely, but one thing that I've noticed is that Evan Yu seems to be pretty good at also seeing what's going on in other frameworks and taking those ideas and incorporating them back, like Vapor Mode for Vue and other things, things that have been inspired from other frameworks and bringing them back, and not just sort of getting tunnel vision and saying our way is the best way and everything else sucks, but just being open-minded and just trying to take the best ideas and incorporate them back. I think really
he's done a good job of that too.
Great. Yeah. And one thing that I love, because it makes me feel a lot more secure in the future of Vue, and not that it will continue to evolve over time and not just be replaced by the next great idea, but that it'll incorporate that next great idea at some point.
I think Vue has legs because of the work of people like him continuing to glean the great ideas that are out there. He's talked about this before. There's always this sort of risk of being a legacy framework that you're unable to make the big shifts because of, what it does to all of the people who have built with your code. And that is that's the hardest part of, I think, any of these maintainers' jobs is you can't just break everybody's code and you can't break their expectations. And that means that when a new idea comes out, you have to be really judicious about whether or not to include it, whether or not to go through the effort of bridging the expectation gap that exists between some new fancy API and the way your users are used to writing code, that kind of stuff. Vue would probably have benefited from never having global plugins, because global plugins means there's global registration, which means that's always going to be in your bundle, and so on and so forth. But once you've given that expectation to users, you need to allow it to continue to exist. So the best you can do is say, well, now you can register your plugin not just globally, you can register it locally, and that means you can tree shake it out. Where somebody else could start their framework and say, no, that's not a concept from the very beginning. You import it here where you're going to use it, and that's the way you write the code. And then that's like a big benefit from them, because then they'll never be, nobody can ever write code that doesn't get optimized in that way. So Evan, along with poor little me, have had to fight some of these battles. I'm probably Alex and the Nuxt team too.
Yeah.
Of like, we gave these people this great tool that actually has downsides in some other way, and now we need to keep their expectations while trying to shift the ball over to somewhere where, it's better in other ways. So I think Vue is facing that along with React. I mean, React's now got their forget compiler and stuff like that, which is basically trying to do the exact same thing. Hey, you can keep writing it the way you expect to write it, but now something fundamentally different is happening under the hood. Yeah, it's interesting to see where these things are going to go. I don't really know. I suspect compilers are here to stay and get probably more and more and more command of our entire code stack.
I think it's like the problem in general, though, is like one of those, it's a good to have problem, because it means that your project has users. And
that's true.
A lot of things
true.
have this problem where it's like, oh, starting a startup, like brand new, it's great because you can just do whatever and you can move fast and you can break things because you've got 3 users. So who cares? Like, they believe in you, so whatever. But then once you are successful and you've got like a 10-year-old code base littered with tech debt and terrible things that you hacked to get there, but you've got thousands and thousands of users that you can't upset. No, I'm speaking from personal experience here. But it's just like the cycle that like, and you're like, okay, how do we change this without ruining everyone's life and move forward? So
and usually like a full rewrite, especially for a software project, it's not possible. Like you can't put all these man hours in. Business will say no, because what's the value in that? Like, how long does it take? Even like with migrations, and we've seen it from Vue 2 to Vue 3, we've seen that from Nuxt 2 to Nuxt 3, that like people are very hesitant. I still work with a lot of clients that say like, okay, we want to migrate now because now we have at least the budget and somewhat of an expectations, and we're not the first ones, as for example Sumit, who was on here a couple episodes ago, was saying like, we don't want to be the first ones migrating, we don't want to have all the problems, but still it's a lot of work depending on how big your application is. So also as an author of a framework or like a library, finding the nice balance of, hey, here are all cool new things to play with, but like, okay, we have breaking changes, how can we make them as minimal as possible while still actually removing technical debt and making sure, well, things are better and more optimized, but also giving people time to migrate. It's really difficult to have like all these things together. And I feel like sometimes it's like the good cap theorem of like, okay, you can only choose 2 out of the 3.
Right. Yep. That is true. But it's a tricky balance.
It definitely is. But as you said before, you also experienced these problems that like Evan, also people from Nuxt team had, because you're also maintaining quite some open source libraries. And as we said before, I think the most popular one in the Vue ecosystem, at least, is Formkit. So maybe people might wonder like, okay, a form, I smash in a form HTML tag and then the few input fields, and like vModel, we have two-way data binding in Vue. Maybe with the define model macro, it's even nicer now. What else do I need? And that's probably the people who didn't build a big form by now with all the business requirements.
That's true.
Might want to. So maybe it would be good to like explain, why is Formkit, let's say, quote unquote, necessary to handle bigger forms, or like a form library in general? And maybe first of all, why are forms so difficult?
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons that forms are difficult. And I don't think starting out, I even really recognized it. So the precursor to Formkit was a project called Vue Formulate. And the precursor to Vue Formulate that everybody heard of was a Vue Formulate that nobody heard of. And in the very first version of Vue Formulate, the entire goal was to try to get, this is back in the Vue 2 days, to try to get your form data into Vuex. It was like, let's get our data into the store. And that turned out to be actually like really challenging to do on a repeatable basis. And we wanted to do it on a repeatable basis because I was working at an agency and we were cranking out lots of these things. And so we wrote a library to do it. And in the end, we didn't really like it that much. So, but what we did like was we liked the fact that we had created all these components to encapsulate the various inputs, and then we decided we wanted to like reuse that idea in the future. So we rewrote the library. I mostly did it in the middle of the night, and that was Reformulate 2. And so the idea was we need something that bridges two main gaps. One is how do you handle the data in your form? And the second one was how do you handle the structure of the form and the markup that gets output? Because there's a lot of different pieces and parts, especially when you have to build accessible forms. So like the way that labels get related to fields, the way that validation rules do, the help text, the way fields relate to each other. This is like the most basic one, but imagine, a password and a confirmed password. Somehow those two inputs need to communicate to each other. So you know which one or that these two things are matching. Vue users can come up with probably 1,000 different ways to solve that particular problem. But creating a universal way for inputs to be able to communicate with each other was a problem set that we had. And so, we created this second one, Reformulate 2, and we put it out there. At that point, I had put out tons of open source stuff in the past. And usually it would get one or two people that would use it occasionally. And then, sometimes I would get an issue file or something like that. But these were very small, basic. Nobody was really using any of this stuff. We put Reformulate 2 out there and it took off, it grew a life of its own. And, thousands of people started using it and we got tons of stars and stuff. And I was like, wait a second, I think maybe other people are having problems with forms too. This was in the late days of Vue 2. So Vue 3 hadn't come out yet, but it was the writing was on the wall. And I was surprised that in the Vue ecosystem, which already had a lot of form libraries, that there was still such an appetite for people to solve the form problem. And I think what people started to resonate with was this exact idea that the forms weren't just the data problem. So, there's a lot of great tools out there, nowadays, vValidate would be a good example, where you're able to model your data really well for the form. That is a big problem set, but there's an equally big problem set of making sure your form is internationalizable, it has proper accessibility, it has the validation messages that are getting placed in the right places, it has all these different nuanced behaviors. When do I show my validation message? Is it on blur? Is it when you click in? Is it when I go to the next input? Is it when I click the submit button? And what are the opinions about what the best practices are for those things? There's a big learning curve for all of this stuff. So to be able to encapsulate all of that and say, no, this is the comprehensive solution to forms, that was really appealing to people. And so that's sort of what the genesis of Vue Formulate was an attempt to get to that. And then when Vue 3 came out, it was we got to rewrite the whole thing. So let's just start from the basics and solve this in a really fundamentally new way. And so that was where Formkit came in. And so the problem sets that Formkit solves are literally anything to do with forms, from styling, accessibility, internationalization, behaviors, data flow, data validation, backend validation, placing backend errors back onto the inputs after they've failed for some reason. All of that entire stack, storing stuff in local storage and rehydrating. Rehydrating forms? Oh my goodness, that alone is a major problem for people, right? Major problem. Because if I have a form and the form changes based on the input of the form, let's say you are, I do the conference tickets example a lot. You're selling conference tickets and you want to allow people to click a button to add another ticket. And then that requires a little bit more information. Click add another ticket, put in more information. And let's say at some point I want to be able to have the ability to edit that or resume, come back to it. Then the structure of my form changes based on the input data that's coming into my form. So my form is based on my form. You sort of have this interesting recursive problem.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of ways to solve that, but how do you solve that in sort of a universal way that that everybody on your team knows when I put the data in here, the form just magically becomes what it's supposed to be again, and in an accessible, internationalizable way, and so on and so forth. It's they become very, very, very hard problems. And you can solve all of these problems just using Vue. Of course, it's totally possible. The problem is you're going to solve it one time, and then it's not repeatable. And when new best practices are out or something like that, you don't get the downstream benefit of being a recipient of it. There's so many issues with it. And so at some point we realized when we were in the process of writing Formkit that like, wait a second, actually, this is like the entire application. Like this is the entire meat of what people's businesses are. They are forms, and then they've got gloss around the forms. So it's okay for us to build, a very robust tool here where we can stretch it to meet the edge cases. We don't need to just be like a simple little utility. It's okay for this to be more than a library, almost be like a framework in and of itself. So that's why we call it a form framework, because it will stretch and become almost anything that it needs to be as long as it's sort of within the boundaries of a form. If that makes sense. I don't know if that answered your question. I just started waxing poetic there, but...
No, I think it was pretty good. And I also want to add something when you said, like, yeah, you can solve all these problems using Vue. I agree. But you also need the knowledge. And you already mentioned I18N, internationalization, A11Y, so accessibility. It's not like everybody knows how to make forms accessible in the right way. And I'm not only talking about, hey, this needs an area label. If it doesn't, I don't know if it's a button with just an icon. It's also about keyboard navigation and everything. And I'm like...
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff.
It is. And we've all been to a lot of sites where we just want to push tab or enter to make things work, and it just does not.
Yes. Yes. And getting it right on, so like a text input is relatively simple. There's a surprising amount of complexity in it still, but it's relatively simple. But getting it right for something more complicated, like an autocomplete, drop-down list kind of stuff, like or paginated results of stuff, it like that one input will take you months. It will literally take you months if you want to check all the boxes. So what you do is you don't. You skip the corners, right? You just don't do it. Like people just don't do it the right way is what ends up happening. Or you use some third party solution. Like I want to say our autocomplete that we have as part of the Formkit Pro package, like writing the first draft of that thing, I think took like 5 months. It was just for a stupid little input. It's insane. You have to think about cache invalidation and multiple pages and querying and how do you rehydrate a queried result on the front end? Like, if all I want to do is store ID 127, how do I make sure that I can repopulate that properly? It's like an endless list of problems. Sorry, Michael, I cut you off.
No, I was just going to say that one of the major things that I have built in my career was a component library that I did a lot of work on. And so we had a lot of these forms, day pickers, autocomplete drop-down things that I built. And I remember like even then I was only working on it for a very specific set of use cases, not like a general autocomplete that can be used anywhere.
Yeah.
And I tried my best to do accessibility and read through the guidelines and try and decipher, like, there's lots of gray areas of like, okay, but like, do I need to put this label here or not? And like, I'm sure it was all right, but I don't know that it was amazing in terms of its accessibility. And so like when you go to check out Formkit, as many of you might be doing right now or later,
link in the description.
You go and you check out like the demo components, you click around, you're like, oh, cool. Like it does some stuff, but like there's way more going on that you don't see. And I think that's probably like the biggest thing. Cause it's, to be honest, to get the CSS and the markup to have a little drop down autocomplete, that doesn't take that long to do.
A few minutes.
It's all the other stuff that's really hard that you don't see unless you're someone using a screen reader and you can't use it.
That's right. Yeah. And the other benefit, of course, is that like when you wrote that library, if you made some mistakes and you published your library out there, somebody's bound to come around and say like, hey, it doesn't work in this particular way the way it's supposed to. You will, of course, sir, I got it. I wasn't 100%. You fix it, you put it out there, and then downstream, your users get to receive the benefit of that. That's another really important thing when you're looking at accessibility for trying, to use a tool that is responsible about that, is you can receive the benefit. So of course, we've gotten tons of pull requests of areas where we didn't do things right, and we needed to fix them, and we've done our very best. The other thing we did is we went out and we hired a studio that employed blind people exclusively to do accessibility audits. And their goal was not to tell us if we checked the box, of, WCAG 2.0, whatever. Like their goal was to tell us, I'm blind, can I use this thing? And so then we got their feedback and tried to implement that. Some of that stuff had absolutely nothing to do with, what all of the accessibility people tell you about. And some of them were, normal accessibility things. So, we got, I think it was like a 10-page report, and we went through every single thing and tried to address every single one of those things to make sure that we were doing it as best we possibly could. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into these things, of course. And the reality is, a lot of the people listening to this are, just to be honest, they're going to say like, it's not that important. My boss doesn't really care. And so I'm going to move on. And like, that's fine. Yeah, everybody has their own priority sets. But as a library, it feels like it's almost a moral obligation to make sure that you're doing what's right for, the masses of people that are trying to use your tool. And so for us, it was a very high priority to make sure that we could do that stuff as best we could. And of course, there's still areas that we're gonna fail and we're gonna need to continue to fix and whatnot. Nothing's ever perfect, but we're trying.
Yeah. I know in the US, and I'm sure the EU and other places have something similar, but they're like, you can get fined pretty hefty sums if your website or software or whatever isn't properly accessible. And so it can be a big deal.
It can be. It really can be.
So I think that's one part. And yeah, as you said, like the EU also has that. And in Germany, for example, now it's getting into effect like in the middle of the year, I think in June, July. It's also responsible for like pages out there that do B2C, for example, that they have to be accessible, not only like government websites and whatnot, where it should be a standard. I think the other part is, and I agree with Justin there, like especially as a library is like some kind of obligation, because especially if you have a lot of users, then every mistake you don't fix, they won't maybe not even notice, or they won't fix it necessarily.
Yeah.
But the other part there is actually making the effort and getting a report from people using it. It's like, it doesn't matter what kind of product you have, like real user testing is so key. And especially for accessibility, there are also a lot of opinions out there like, oh, should I even like put this label there? Should I use that tag or not? This, that. While usually people can tell you that they rely on assistive technology every day. So the easiest is asking them, right? And I think it's important to highlight that this has been done, because I know a lot of scenarios and a lot of libraries won't go like that far. It's like, hey, we want to make sure this is right. I think I disagree with your statement, Justin, is like, yeah, of course, business-wise, sure, every company has a different, let's say, priorities. But just by saying, okay, look, if this is something, let's say, public-facing, easiest case, e-commerce, then, well, even business-wise, there is a case for that. But beyond that, of course, you don't want to say, hey, okay, people with disabilities, and it can be permanent or temporary, it doesn't matter. They basically can't use the website or have a worse experience. I understand that this is like a lot of things like, oh yeah, we need performance and SEO and it should be super fast, but nobody cares about accessibility. Sadly, I hope that the law also will change. But in a way, I think also there's that obligation just say like, hey, let's keep the internet, make the internet a better place to just make it usable for everybody as much as possible.
I mean, that's what we want. It's a little bit idealistic to assume that like some person who's just learning Nuxt for the very first time is also going to be able to pick up the mantle of being able to do this. And unfortunately, that's the reality. The other thing to consider is a lot of the most complex forms are in admin systems. And technically, they are supposed to be accessible too, at least in the United States. With the American Disability Act, the idea is like you need to be accommodating to whatever somebody's disability is in order to have a job or receive commerce. So, if you want to go to an ice cream shop, they technically are supposed to have a ramp unless they were grandfathered in, before the laws were passed or whatever. And the same is sort of true for an employer who is employing people. But there are, of course, exceptions, right? Like you don't have to, I don't know, what's a ridiculous example? The UFC doesn't have to be able to, like, isn't forced to hire anybody of any physical capability to be a fighter, right? That's not realistic. It would be, unrealistic for a business to have to hire a blind person to do photography, right? Like there are, of course, exceptions to these rules. And sometimes these admin systems sort of fall into that space, you know? I think that's where I see the most corner cutting is like, they're just like, let me get this thing working so that way my product can get shipped or the boxes can get labeled or whatever the functional thing is that they're doing. And accessibility, you know, is the absolute last thing that they're thinking of when they're putting these forms together. And I want to be realistic that for people like that, I could talk about Formkit's accessibility all day long. And they're like, I just don't care because I want to put the label on my box that I'm shipping out. So I sort of understand both of those positions. But yeah, especially for user facing stuff, I mean, it's important. My own sister actually is like a quadriplegic and she needs all the accessibility things that you can give her. She's sighted, but she still needs all these accessibility things. And it's incredibly frustrating to her when, you know, things don't work the way that she wants them to work. Like she's trying to buy football tickets, American football, none of this soccer stuff. And like, she couldn't do it on the website. Because she can't drive her wheelchair into the stadium except for through a certain entrance, and she can only sit in a certain place. And so she had to like call multiple times on a phone, which she can't use in order to be able to, you know, get the tickets. And so you don't want to be part of the problem. You want to be part of the solution if you're a web developer, you know, and at the very minimum, choose libraries, and Formkit by no means is the only one, but choose libraries that are, you know, trying to help those people when you're building your systems. Yeah. And there's a business case.
I want to just add one last thing where I think there's like some side benefits too. So like when you write tests for your code, you often end up writing code that's better. And I think with accessibility, if you make your forms accessible, it's also easier to use for people who don't have any disabilities. So like keyboard navigation and all sorts of these other things are like, technically I don't need that. I can click a mouse and do it. But like if it's properly keyboard usable, then it's way better. And I enjoy my time using that way more.
We always have that little frustration when you like hit tab, as we said before, and it just doesn't work. Like, okay, then I have to use the mouse.
Or enter. And it doesn't submit. And I'm like...
Yeah. No, I fully feel that. And also agree with that. It's like it gives better user experience no matter if you have a disability or not. It can be enough that you're just like, I like to use the keyboard more and not like, oh, I can't use my mouse for whatever reasons.
Right. Just one pet peeve that I have to throw out there, because just yesterday I was on this UI and had a whole list of checkboxes with the labels beside it. And when you put your mouse over the label, the cursor changed to a hover. And I was like, sweet. So I started clicking. Nope, I gotta go over to the checkbox, which is of course like the default like checkbox that's like 12 by 12 pixels. And so it's like a game of precision. And so I was like, if the hover, like it didn't change the cursor, that would have been okay. But because the cursor changed and you like tricked me into thinking I could click on it, it was like especially frustrating.
Yeah.
But
it's like you didn't 99%
of not being able to click the label.
Yeah.
But and the best part, this is like a browser functionality, right? Like if you wrap your label around that input, it's clickable. Or if you use a label on the for, but even if you don't know about the for attribute, like if you wrap it around, it should work. So yeah, this is also like use semantic HTML, like, okay, buttons, right? Links, anchor text. So these are like, nobody like has to be a crazy accessibility expert. I feel like if we take a look at the report, it's like, I think something with million, I think web accessibility. So WebAIM million report, it shows the top 10 mistakes on websites, and the top 10 mistakes on websites, we all would understand how to fix them. It's so trivial. It's like missing alt text, and like using buttons instead of links, or divs instead of buttons, and all these things, color contrast. So they are usually, in the most cases, it's very easy. And if that all would just work out of the box, like software would get, like they would become so much better. We're not even talking about the complex cases, which also, for example, Formkit solves with like nested forms that are super complicated and keeping the tab order there and so on and so on. We're even talking about very simple scenarios. So
yeah,
I think
that's totally true.
Like just having a look at the reports, like, okay, most of these things you can automatically test. And it's like, okay, let's fix them in a couple of minutes. Like giving an alt tag to an image, either do it in your CMS, or if it's static image, just write it in there. It's not that tricky. Same with like buttons with just an icon. Give them a label, give them a name to actually make sure that people can't see the logo. And also the search engine, they know what the link is going to. That's a huge part there. And I feel like we could make a whole episode of accessibility.
We really could.
Yeah, I think we even said it before in another episode. So we might should do that at some point. But I think it's also a good point to move on, because you mentioned, okay, you hired a studio that works with mainly blind people to do a report. You put a lot of effort, like 5 months for the first draft of the autocomplete. So people might wonder, okay, but it's a free library. It's open source, as we said in the beginning. So how does that work?
Yeah, so Formkit core is open source, and then Formkit itself has spawned a number of other open source libraries. So there's Formkit core, which is all of the architecture for Formkit, and then every native input. So text, checkbox, radio, select lists, all of that. All of that is all part of the open source. Then we have a paid piece, which is what we call like synthetic inputs, and this is Formkit Pro. And it's just it's basically like the form components that are made out of divs. That's a way to think about it, right? So your autocompletes, your date pickers, your mask inputs, things like that, like these, obnoxious tag lists, the stuff that takes a really long time to write and implement. And you wrap your own. So if you want to bring your own, external library, like, I don't know, ShadCN or whatever, you can get all those wired into the open source core too. And there's some people have even written those wrapper libraries and they're available open source. Ours is just our first party solution. So we kind of take the same, very granular Formkit approach into those other components. So that's the paid product. And then
that's a one-time payment, right? Just to iterate on that.
So the way it works is it's one time per project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if you are a business, you buy it one time for your project. If you're an agency, the goal is that you would buy that for each of your client projects and just include that in the price of the bill that you send to your client. And then we also have this AI form generator where you can just ask for whatever type of form you want and it'll generate the first pass for you. We call it Kickstart because it's not going to it's an AI, has all the faults that AIs do, but it'll do its best a given prompt to generate a form for you. And then it gives you the Vue code for that at the end of the day. Or it gives you what we call schema, which is a JSON serializable format, which Formkit offers. Like you can store any Formkit form that you can make, or even Formkit inputs that you can make. You can write them as JSON and store them in a database and then give them to our component and it'll rebuild your entire thing. So you can choose which format you want, Vue or JSON. So those are the two paid products. And that's kind of our hope, is that those would become a sustainable source of revenue to keep the whole project going. Yeah.
And as you said, your hope is that it would. That means that you're not there yet.
No, definitely not there yet. We have an agency as well, which it's the real thing that's paying our bills. And also the way that we dog food this, and it's an impetus for us to, build it in the first place, was we were building a lot of sites as an agency. Yeah, so most of this is still being done as an act of charity to the world, which is fine. But we hope that someday it would be able to cover the bills. It's actually surprising because there's a lot of really, really big companies that use Formkit, which maybe shouldn't be so surprising. But
that's the surprising part, yeah.
Yeah, if you had told me, and I'm not allowed to say publicly a lot of them, but they're all big brand names you guys have heard of. And if I could have gone back to the beginning and been like, these are the brands that are going to use Formkit, then I'd be like, oh, well, then we're definitely sustainable. But that's not the way it works, right? Because it's a product. So they buy it for the same price you buy it for. Yeah. So that's the way it works.
Unless they have 10 sides of legal contracts and then have to put the enterprise
that
tier
would be
on
nice.
or something.
That'd be nice.
Well, that depends. If you have to deal with the contracts, no. If the sum is right, yeah, I get it. Okay, then definitely also there, as I said before, links in the description to all of that. Check out Formkit, everybody. And if you use that, and especially, I also use the pro inputs in various projects, and people usually super happy that they don't have to put in the work of hey, I want to draft my autocomplete straight away. So that's especially useful if you just want to ship things and want battle tested components. I can just give a big thumbs up. And I'm really curious what people did with Kickstart, because I mean, you can even upload photos that hey, give me that physical form and just bring that in the Word. So okay, I could digitalize my whole company just by using that AI and some custom code.
Yeah, I mean, really blown away by how good AI has gotten at that. Right. I mean, we're also just a user of AI, of course. And well, it's not like we created our own models from scratch or anything, but it has gotten incredibly good at being able to do that translation layer. And then we brought a bunch of super innovative, genuinely innovative ideas, I think, to the AI space that we kind of pioneered in Kickstart, and we'll eventually ship other things using these same concepts. But that we're able to make really good deterministic decisions based on these fuzzy inputs. And that's really the magic of AI is like, can you take fuzzy input and turn it into determinism?
Yeah.
And this is not what ChatGPT does. It takes fuzzy input and then it outputs fuzzy input or fuzzy output. And it's a bit of a party trick because the fuzziness of the output like sounds good to our human ear, but if you try to make that actually do code like things, it's pretty hard. And so a lot of time and effort was spent on trying to understand a good architecture to take those fuzzy inputs and create like actual hard code at the end of the day that worked for a user and was fully aware of everything that Formkit could do. And so, yeah, the people who use it, like, it's funny because there's a free trial. Anybody can go there. It's kickstart.formkit.com and just type something in for fun and you'll see. But so there's a free trial and eventually you hit like a limit. There's like a token limit, basically. Once you hit your token limit, then you pay, I think it's $10 a month or something. And that unlocks it to unlimited. So as soon as somebody gets past that gate, you just see them like use it because they're doing massive translations of particular sets of data they already have. That's by far its most useful application. So, like actually the US government was really interested in this a while ago and using Kickstart because they have literally thousands of these paper forms that they need to then convert into digital forms as they're constantly modernizing processes and stuff like that. And this saves literally countless hours by being able to put it through a system like that. So I think it's still interesting where things like this are going to go. And, I've definitely learned that developers are scared of AI through this. They're reticent even to use it because of kind of, I don't know if it's an existential fear or just kind of a concern that if we all adopt this, then what we do changes and we don't want to change what we do. Like, almost like somebody coming and being like, you can't use Vue anymore. And you're like, well, I don't like what you're saying.
Yeah.
Got that. Yes.
So I'm not sure exactly what it is, but
I think there's a lot of uncertainty as well of like, okay, AI is clearly changing how we write code, but how is it changing? And like, it feels like it's not like other things where the pace of the change is pretty slow over time. Like, oh, we used to write jQuery, now we write Vue, but like that transition can happen pretty slowly. You just like switch jobs. You don't have to really like worry about suddenly your skills no longer being valuable because over 2 months, everyone switched from jQuery to Vue and you don't know Vue yet, right? I think as like, it feels like it's going faster and you're like, well, a year from now, is it still going to be worth it for me to do what I'm currently doing? Or do I need to like learn some whole new thing? And if so, like what is it that I have to learn? Like that's totally unclear. And I think maybe there's something of that in there.
Yeah, these are big, big life questions that are hard to answer for people. But I gave a talk one time at one conference only ever. It's the only talk I've only ever given once about this exact problem. And it's just my opinion, but I really think that people need to jump on the bandwagon. And I know that it's uncomfortable to have to learn something new. And AI is not going to like literally replace you tomorrow. But if you are not an AI engineer, and I don't mean you're making AIs, I mean you are using it to do what you do and know how to leverage it, I do think you're going to get left behind. And that's uncomfortable and people don't like that. And unfortunately, I really, really think this is true. And so I would really encourage everybody to, at a minimum, start using it to help you write your code. Go use Cursor or something like that. I was like here in the US, I, was at a conference with some people and I was asking, who was using Cursor and whatnot. And like everybody was using Cursor. And then when I was in Bonn, Alex was there in, what was that, October?
Yeah, we did a little panel.
Yeah, we did a little panel, and on stage I said, how many of you are using Cursor? And I think there were 3 people in the audience that put up their hands. And that worries me, because I just think that you're at a severe competitive disadvantage. And so I know that it's uncomfortable, but I would strongly recommend people at least start trying this. It is a game changer. Whether or not it's perfect, that's not really the discussion. It's not perfect, and it makes lots of mistakes, and you still have to be an engineer, but it's coming.
I completely agree with that. And I think that it's a totally different way of writing code as well. So it's hard in that way, because it's not like learning a new programming language or learning a new framework, because it's a whole like different way of thinking about your problem and how to attack it and how to like use this thing to help you. Or it's almost more like programming with another person than like
Yeah.
using a tool. And you almost have to like get to know this other person, and then that person gets upgraded and you're like, okay, what can you do things better now? Like, oh, okay, you're better at this, but you still suck at this. Okay, cool.
Yep.
Like now I know that I can like work around that a little bit.
Yeah, I really like to thinking about what AI does for you. It's very much like photography. And go with me for a second here. Like in the early days of photography, what made you a photographer was having a camera. Okay. And then cameras became more popular. And so being a photographer was like doing a good job of having expensive equipment and using it effectively. And then
being able to focus.
Yeah, sure. And like now everybody has cameras, and the cameras themselves are excellent across the board. Like you don't even have to be a good photographer to take good pictures. So then what does being a good photographer mean? Well, it boils it down to the essence of what it was in the very first place, which was like capturing an important moment, which is about being in the right place, having the right idea, like being there with the right tool at the right place for the right moment, and seeking like knowing how to seek those things out. It's a much more like it's a much harder thing to do, honestly. Like go to, I don't know, the war zone or the poverty stricken area and taking those important photos is what it means to be a great photographer now. Or even if it's a wedding photographer, like knowing how to deal with the pressure of that moment. I shot 3 weddings, and they're horrible because it's like that moment that they're going to kiss is the only time in history that's going to happen. You can't be like, hold on a second, could you do that again? No, you got to capture it at that moment, right? So like that's what it became to become a photographer. That's what it means now. And that doesn't mean that being a photographer is any less valuable. It's just a little bit different. And in some ways, it's even more valuable. And being an engineer is a similar thing now. We're boiling away. Like for a while, what it meant to be an engineer was somebody who had a computer, because it was all engineering. And then what it meant was like, okay, well, now you're actually good at writing code. And now we're realizing it's actually not so much about the syntax. It's about the way you break down a problem. And the syntax is becoming less and less important. And what's becoming more important is how you solve problems in the real world, which is what engineering is supposed to be anyway. So yeah, I would just encourage people to jump on and start using it.
I think there is a really good article from Eddie Osmani, who's working at Google. Probably a lot of people, at least some people know the name, rings a bell, called The 70% Problem, Hard Truths About AI-Assisted Coding. Where I really think AI is a tool, and I agree with the article to a large, or like to some degree at least, that it doesn't improve the quality of the code necessarily, because it learns from, well, all the code that's there. And that's usually not the best. But you have a really good velocity with that. You have a really good pace. But now I see usually AI being used as one extreme or another, like not at all, or like tap, 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 and cursor. And like, don't care, tap, 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 doesn't work. Again, let's try something different. Or like, okay, this code doesn't work. Somebody posted and people are like, hey, where got this from? Yeah, ChatGPT said it should work, or something like that. So it's either full on the AI train. I just built my whole business with AI, my whole SaaS whatsoever, my whole product, or no AI at all. I think the middle way of like, okay, use it as a tool and use it where it makes the most sense. Like I use Copilot, for example. I don't use Cursor, but I use Copilot a lot while coding, and it helps a lot with velocity. I still think about the code that it's generating, and everybody should.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody should double check that. It's a bit
Yeah, definitely.
like you can't just say like, okay, whatever is there is fine, because okay, if it doesn't work, you might see that for the happy case, but you won't test the edge cases, as like a lot of developers don't. Maybe you just miss one. So it's really focusing on the architecture more, and yeah, reviewing the code. Treat AI a bit like the junior developer that just does things for you, and you tell him, oh hey, that's different, I want it differently, or hey, that's not good code. So it's really about how you use it, and don't go to either of the extremes, I would say.
And one use case like is also like architecture, like not having it write the code, but like, for example, I wanted to implement a feature one time and I needed to update my database schema to do that. And so I'm like, okay, I know how to do database schemas and I kind of understand joins a little bit, but like, I don't really know. And so like describe the problem a little bit and say, here's what my current schema looks like. Give me 3 different options and like list out like some pros and cons for each. And then I go through and read that and say, okay, first of all, does this actually make any sense?
Mm-hmm.
And usually it does these days. You know, that's one thing that's also challenging is that AI is like every few months getting so much better that if you tried it 6 months ago and it was weird, it's probably way better now.
That's true.
And makes way less mistakes than it did before. But like I'll go through that and it gives me these 3 different options and then I can see, oh, this way is kind of interesting. I wouldn't have thought about that before. This is the way that I was doing it, or I was thinking about doing it anyway. And then there's a third option and I can kind of like, oh, maybe I like this idea from this one. I can kind of incorporate that. Or you can like chat a little bit back and forth and say, well, what if we tried to do this? Or actually, I don't like that about this part. And then it kind of comes up with some ideas. And then you can say, okay, now I've got some like better ideas that I can work with. And I'm still deciding, I'm still the one making the decision and thinking through like, okay, of these 3 solutions, what actually makes the most sense? Because I'm the one that knows the entire code base and how it all works together. And,
right.
you know, the future where the next features I might want to add or whatever else you might take into consideration there. But it can help you in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. And the big one to me is using it to actually solve, not just like having it help with the code, but having it be part of the solution to your problem. So these APIs are out there. You
Absolutely.
can plug AI into almost any problem you have and amazing things pop out. It reminds me of the early days of HTML5 and CSS, where we didn't know what we had in our hands. And we were all just trying to figure it out. Like, it's interesting. Media queries existed way before responsive design. Well, way before, but significant amount of time before responsive design.
Yes.
Right. And it took Ethan Marcotte basically being like, hold on a second. I could make the same website work in both places. I don't need to create the 2 websites. That idea was already, or the technology was already out there. It just needed a human to come around and be like, let me bridge the gap. Let me come up with the idea. It's like we have all been given that opportunity right now. Like, if AI doesn't get any better from where it is right now, there is at least $3 trillion worth of companies to be built on what currently exists. What currently exists. We don't need AGI or anything else. Like, what exists right now is enough to help your business solve its problem. And so, and like, as engineers, that should be part of our palette. Like, we should know when to reach for that tool versus some other tool. And so that's what I would encourage people to get involved with too, is like, start playing with this stuff and figure out how to make it solve your business's problems or your technical challenges. That really doesn't have much to do with Formkit, but.
Well, I mean, it's a nice bridge to a little section in the podcast that we wanted to introduce just for you, because we mentioned you here and there also in the episode with Avenue, because you have quite some hot takes every now and then. So with this little segment, and we'll just call it Justin's hot takes. Let's just throw in some keywords, some topics, and then just discuss maybe hot takes you have in mind, just like your opinion on these topics, and then just like see how many we can
You've got the topics?
Yeah, we've got the topics. We'll throw them at you now.
You're going to throw them to me, and
you have the hot takes.
Smack them. All right, let's go.
Yeah, we can start with a very simple one. Vue in 2024.
In 2024.
So last year. Yeah.
Vue in 2024.
Yeah.
Okay. My hot take on that is that Vue suffered a little bit in 2024.
Interesting. Why that? In which way?
It suffered because there was no big hotness, right? It was just stable and working and doing its job. And there was a lot of really big hot things out in the world, right? There was Svelte 5 and runes and SolidStart shipping and all of this other stuff that was happening in the world. And Vue was just chugging along like a good worker. And so from just a public perception, I think that, was it actually struggling? No, but I think that's the perception. And in reality, I think eventually people will enjoy the stability. But yeah, that's what I would say about Vue in 2024.
Interesting. I think so. Based at least on, there are a lot of surveys, of course, but based on State of JS, actually, people were really happy in terms of retention positivity with Vue this year. Not as happy as like Vue 2 times. So
because it didn't change.
Yeah, exactly. Because of stability, because the people who were churned by Vue 3 or maybe like just had to get used to that, at least that would be my read on it. They're happy with, hey, it's there, it works. The ecosystem, especially, I think, and Formkit is a big part there, but also other libraries like Inspire UI, like Motion View, Framer Motion now being available for other JavaScript frameworks, more framework agnostic stuff to bridge the gaps to say, okay, we don't have like an ecosystem that, let's say, hangs behind that much. Of course, there's still some parts that could like be improved always, but to feel like a bit more whole as a Vue 3 ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that like my hot take for 2024 is that it seems like it's not doing well. And my hot take for 2025 is I hope it keeps doing that. I hope it doesn't need okay, here's a hot take. This might be on your list. I'm not that jazzed about vapor mode.
That is on the list, of course.
Yes, I'm not that jazzed about it. And I've talked to you some about it, Alex, and it's not because it's not technically amazing. It is technically awesome, and it's very much the right direction for a framework to move. My hot take on it is that it undoes a little bit of what's been done over this period of time. Not because it's incompatible. There's no, thank goodness there's no big incompatibilities coming. It's just another way to do things. And so my hot take on that is less ways to do things are better.
I wouldn't even say that's a hot take. Like in general, I think like when we think about how many ways there are to write a component, like we probably could find 5, 6 ways, but the usual way, like we say, without any libraries, like Vue Wine in there, by the way, recommended if you want to have multiple components in one file, or like, I don't know, the template option for when you use it with a CDN, there are a few less like, okay, options API, composition API without script setup, which nobody should do anymore, and composition API with script setup, which is the recommended way. Then we have like, okay, Vapor, which is like the composition API, but also not feature parity yet. So yeah, I see where this is going. Though I guess in a way it's also like at some point there will be feature parity, and hopefully maybe at some point the options API can also be used in Vapor mode. Nobody knows if that will be the case or not. But at least the composition API, there should be feature parity, except things that are not needed like vmemo or something, which ideally when Vapor mode comes out, there is less friction for the end user.
I think the friction for the end user, the friction won't be there. There's going to be this long period of time where people like me and other library maintainers are feeling like second-class citizens until our libraries effectively support Vapor mode as a primary thing. So I think that's I just think less ways to do things is good. And at the same time, I get it. I get it. Because if I was maintaining Vue, I would be doing the exact same kind of thing. This isn't a shot at Evan. You're going to get me crucified, Alex. Come on.
Nah.
It's also it's a feature that's, I thought you were going this way with the Vue in 2024 one, where it's a marketing problem where Vue didn't have anything flashy or exciting to get people excited about it.
Yeah.
And Vapor mode is exciting, but also it's not exciting in that it's like, oh, you just flip a switch and it's faster, but how much faster does my Vue code actually need to be rendered faster? For a lot of people,
doesn't matter. Yeah.
They don't need that. For the people who do need it, they're like, yes, give it to me now. But it's not like the composition API or some other new define model. It's going to make your life every day is going to be easier because of this new feature. It's just like yeah, I flipped that switch a couple months ago, and I guess our metrics are better, but I haven't looked at them in a while. So, but again, I agree with you. Like, this is the way the frameworks have to get faster and leaner, and you can't just like,
The amount of time and effort that is being spent right now to shave microseconds off of framework times by the collective world it's very significant. And I don't want to diminish how important performance is and that effort is, because it is important. But I also have felt it on the other side, which is when somebody, as a maintainer, when somebody comes to you and says, hey, this isn't performant, it's like, I don't know what it is. I don't understand this, but it's like somebody sticks a burning spear directly into your heart.
Yeah.
And it feels awful. And so I get why the maintainers are in this like little battle thing that keeps going on. And every time somebody's like, hey, look at this one, it's a little bit faster, then there's all these counter articles being like, well,
yeah,
actually, you didn't try it in this way, and
it's like
and
the
like
worst insult as a developer.
it is it's like the worst insult. Yeah.
But it also
And
sparks
so
like innovation. For example, what we've seen with Johnson.
it does.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's like this good thing, and it's also this like kind of weird frustrating thing, because as a consumer I am also intrigued by it. And so like I think one of the reasons that it hits me so hard is like I know how much I actually do calculate that into my mental decision making when I'm choosing a tool to use, not because of the metrics at the end of the day, because the metrics on all of these things are great nowadays, but more just like, well, Solid is really fast, but Svelte 5, ooh, yeah, I think
Yeah.
maybe for my next project, I'm going to pick Svelte 5 because it was faster. And
Based
it's
on
like,
some
well,
arbitrary benchmark. Yeah.
yes, exactly. And so that we're in a weird place with all of that. And so I understand how Vue Vapor is like important, because it's an important way to show that the concept of Vue is compatible with blazing fast everything. Anyway, more hot takes.
I think also like just to add there, it's also a way to show that Vue is still relevant. Isn't like, okay, we're
Yes.
keeping up with the trend, quote unquote trend of like signals now also in the template. So that's also in a way a part. Plus, I can see at least a niche part of applications where this is really useful. For example, data visualization, huge entries of like data tables and whatnot. So there is benefit. Is it for the 80% case? Probably not, because it doesn't matter if a landing page is like rendering 10 or 11 milliseconds on the browser.
Right.
And Vue is already the fastest SSR framework, at least given one benchmark out there. So that's also good. But that's a different story. Michael, want to pick a topic there regarding?
Yeah, I think we got time for a couple more hot takes here, and then so how about Tailwind? Do you have a hot take on Tailwind?
Oh, I did.
You did.
My hot take on Tailwind was that it was hot garbage. And not even that it was hot garbage. It was actually a really well-made poison for the ecosystem. And I have decided that I've lost. That's what I've decided. I still think it's a little poisonous.
Why?
But
Interesting.
But I'm just like, I also didn't like Prettier, and I still don't like the way that Prettier formats my code, but it's like I lost the battle, so I'm just going to embrace it. So I've decided I'm just going to embrace Tailwind. I use it on everything. I've swallowed my pride, and I'll just go with it. And there's some things I like about it, of course. And here's what I don't like about it. What I don't like about it is it caused all component libraries and everybody to stop shipping DOM elements. And I think that this was really bad. There used to be a day where your component libraries shipped the DOM elements, and that was good because it meant that accessibility and these other problems were located in one spot. We could fix them in one spot. Now everything is headless. Everything is headless. It's almost like very, very few people do what we're trying to do and ship the DOM elements. And the reason is you can't get your style classes on the DOM elements, right? If you ship them more than one layer deep, you need to now provide some mechanism to get them down there. And there's tons of, like, everybody invents their own. There's no standard. So there's no like for us, we do it based on, we name every single DOM element in Formkit, every single one has its own address or name. So it'd be like, the wrapper, the inner, the input, the help, the description, whatever. They each have their own. And so it's like that dash class, right? So like input class or whatever. And so you can put them all on the outside, or you can write a configuration object for it, whatever. But because there's no standard for it, and there's no like really somebody should come up with an open source standard that all libraries can choose to adopt for how to handle this problem. People just don't ship inputs anymore. And instead, headless has become the thing du jour. And I think that is almost entirely driven by utility classes. Not entirely, but almost entirely. So that's my gripe about it.
I've never heard that one before, but that makes sense to me. And so there's two things that I've realized recently, some drawbacks to Tailwind. And generally, I love Tailwind. I've been using it for years in all my projects and all that. The first one is that it's not good for technical education. And so because I use it all the time, I just have it in all of like the code that I write and the code in my courses and in my blog posts and everything else. But it's really distracting. There's a lot of like extra things on the screen that don't need to be there when you could just have a single class name and then like hide away all of the CSS and styling stuff when you don't need it on there. And I've gotten like lots of feedback on that in the past. And so I've decided recently that for education, I'm not going to use Tailwind just to like simplify what people are seeing. The second one, which I haven't confirmed, I might need to do some more experimentation with this, but I think that AI struggles with Tailwind, partly because you have to output more tokens to get all the styling on your elements. But also I think there's an issue with consistency because, I mean, you can solve this if you like encapsulate different components and stuff like that. But if you have an entire app, let's say, and you want to update the styling for that entire application, AI, you basically have to rewrite every single file or edit every single file in multiple, like every single class tag has to be edited to update that. Whereas if you had like a single style sheet, you could just output those style sheets that need to be changed. And so I suspect that, if you switched to a less Tailwind, more just like vanilla CSS, it might be more effective with LLMs. But that's not a strong conviction yet because I haven't actually tested that one out yet.
I have a few takes on it as well. I think it's pretty interesting, like especially the education part, as I also use Tailwind most of my examples, workshops, and so on. I think if you really just want to say, okay, let me remove that part from the template because it's distracting or it makes the lines like 500 characters long, you could technically still use add apply and saying, hey, in a real production code, you would write it there. So you could still stick with like your design system whatsoever, but then people are like, hey, what is this add apply? And so I kind of understand, like, especially if you're not focused on the CSS, just say like, hey, here's some content. I get it. The vanilla CSS part in AI is pretty interesting because if you would write CSS for your components, then you would still have that in the components with scope styles.
Yeah.
So that would probably have the same issue unless you say, let's say, I don't know, I talked about it, I don't know, a month ago or something, where I say like, let's define headings and typography and have an own component that says, hey, I have a heading. And I can say the heading has a specific semantic, so like H1 to H6, right? Or like a paragraph or div if you, as an SK fetch, which you never use. And it has a specific look. So it can look like an XL heading, a super heading, I don't know, subheading whatsoever. And if you have that all in your one component, say like, I want to change all the headings on my application that use that component, it's possible. But it depends on how you architecture your site, of course. If you use Tailwind to just like say, okay, I describe all my H1s in the same way, ideally you have some kind of abstraction, and Tailwind, of course, delegates that over to the component framework.
I think Tailwind is a massive success because React didn't have scoped styles.
That's a hot take. Like that's it. That's the hottest hot take so far, I would say. I think
that's what made it take off. And then once it reached a critical mass, everybody else like just kind of adopted it. You know what I mean? Like in Vue, I think the use case is smaller than in other places, but it's still, I mean, it's fine. It's fine. I've written several sites now in it. And actually Formkit ships Tailwind styles now. And we even have a Tailwind style editor where you can generate your own theme and then download it, and it's all Tailwind. And so I'm on team
Yeah.
Tailwind, but I do think it was a little bit of a step back for the library ecosystem, unfortunately. And I don't really see a way to resolve it, unfortunately. It's except maybe a massive effort to get on board with a standard.
On the note of the headless parts, I would even ask, is it that bad that component libraries don't ship the DOM elements anymore? And basically said, here's your functionality. Here are like recipes that you can copy, own the implementation, and do it yourself. And if they're like functionality wise problems, let's say how headless UI, for example, is doing that, which is also from Tailwind Labs, right? As open source libraries say, okay, you can copy that like on a listbox item. And if something breaks, then we can fix it. And as you said before, you get the fixes like downstream as an end user.
I mean, my opinion is yes, it is bad. And I think, of course, headless UI, it's a very small little library, headless UI, but it's put out by the Tailwind team because this is the problem. All previous UI libraries were almost impossible for Tailwind users to use. They couldn't use them. So they needed two design systems. And so that is what really gives rise to it. There are some benefits, I think, to headless. I'm not going to say the whole thing is trash. I particularly like it when the stuff that you're doing doesn't have DOM related to it. The problem is these like component libraries are mostly DOM, and you're putting the burden of doing a lot of the accessibility work back on the user. Not entirely, but most of them, because there's so many data attributes and other kinds of stuff that needs to go along with that. So the user is responsible. It's funny. If you go to the Headless UI website, a lot of their examples are not accessible. Their own examples aren't. Yes, because they're not doing these exact things. And this is true across the board. Like if you go and look at headless component libraries and you look at their accessibility, specifically on their form elements, most of them are not accessible because to make them accessible would require putting tons of different data attributes throughout there. And they don't want to do that on their examples because it muddies it up.
But couldn't you do this in the component itself, like in the list box element or list box item that you like basically?
You could, but you're responsible for writing the list box element.
No. This is also what's shipped by Headless UI, right? Like they have like a let's say a list box. Like you have certain Vue components that you can still basically inside that list box itself. You can put like some list box elements, dividers, whatsoever. So in a way, there is accessibility based on that built in. If you have it like that,
there's definitely some of the features of these things built in. And it particularly happens when the DOM element, whatever the DOM element is that they're shipping, is part of the thing that they're shipping.
Yeah.
Right.
Of course, everything custom you have to deal with yourself. That's true. That's absolutely correct.
Which is the real value of headless, right? That's the primary value of headless is that you get to provide your own DOM. Like there's a time and a place for it, but I don't know.
I mean, especially if you
that's
say,
my opinion.
If you say that listbox, let's say option or listbox options components, they are unstyled and you could style each of them, then you have like that, at least how's conceptually what my understanding of that you say, okay, if listbox options, basically, okay, you have like a UL or L whatsoever, or however it's semantic correct. Then you have the listbox option. You can style, you can provide whatever you want around that. So you have the semantics and the accessibility inside the components based on what you provide also as data, and everything around you can style. But of course, it depends also on the library how well this is executed, and that once again puts the part to the library.
There's a lot of that kind of stuff that goes into it. I mean, I will say Headless UI has done an admirable job of trying to be accessible across the board. Like a very admirable job. Most of the stuff is very, very good. But there are places where the burden goes back to the user. I don't remember them off the top of my head. We did a whole audit of this stuff at one point.
But the user's also not aware if, yeah, okay.
There are places where the burden goes back to a user to put those kinds of things on there, right? And then that's where things get sticky. I mean, it's sort of true across the board. It also is a pain for the user. So the solution to this, which you mentioned, is you give people a version of all of the code ahead of time, ShadCN style, and then it's up to them to choose how to like put all that together. That's sort of like the solution to the problem of headless being a pain. The problem is that's also a pain. I have talked to so many people that have used ShadCN that really don't like it. I have yet to find somebody who actually enjoys it. Do one of you guys enjoy it? You'd be my first.
I didn't use
Never used
ShadCN
it.
in particular, but Radix or like also Nuxt UI is doing, I think, pretty well. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I haven't tried nuxt.UI
Oh, you should.
since they did that the whole Radix thing.
Also, V3 alpha is out. Tailwind is, I think when this episode is out, Tailwind V4 is released already. So
I
definitely
know.
worth trying.
I'm actually excited about that one. I think
Same.
it's a good update.
100%.
Yeah, it's a good update.
Making things simpler. Justin, we have a lot of other hot takes on the list, but time is running, unfortunately.
So many hot takes.
You have to come back on. Maybe we'd even just do a whole hot take episode.
We'll do a
Who
giant
knows?
hot
That
take
would be
episode.
fun. Yeah.
People are gonna be so mad at me again. Oh,
That's
boy.
fine. That's fine. Reddit will explode again as long as nobody calls you, let's keep it there. Only good vibes. Everybody, comment your hot take somewhere on social media and follow Justin. Justin, where can people follow you, actually?
You can follow me on X, JP Schroeder, or Blue Sky, jpschroeder.com.
And of course, check out Formkit, Kickstarter, all links in the description to everything. Justin, thank you so much for taking the time and talking about
Super fun, guys. Thank you. I really
Thanks
appreciate
for
it.
coming on.
And
All right.
for everybody still not at the latest episode, so if there's a new one, check it out. Otherwise, the older episode, we have amazing episodes there, predictions, other, so to say, hot takes, but also some recaps and talking, of course, about Vue and the whole ecosystem. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and see you all soon. Bye-bye.